If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I'm a huge fan of Megami Tensei, and my first foray into the series was Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne on PlayStation 2. It was so different from the prototypical JRPG of the era, and Nocturne by and large helped refine the style of the more mature RPGs that we see today, from your Personas to your Niers. But video games of that period haven't always aged well. Today, we're here to find out if Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster can revitalize this watershed JRPG to a new generation. But first, please subscribe and click the bell to get updates whenever I publish new videos. I'll also have more content annotated for you at the end. Now with that out of the way, let's dive in. This review is based on physical, retail copies of the game played on the PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch.
That's right. As of now, your will to live shall sustain you. Believe in it, and survive.
Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne begins with the player-named protagonist meeting up with his friends and teacher at a Shinjuku hospital. Suddenly, a vortex world appears outside, destroying the fabric of reality and summoning demons and ghosts in its wake. A strange child and his caretaker then turn the main character into a half-demon, and the player uses his newfound supernatural abilities to resolve this twisted reality. If that sounds completely crazy to you, well, that's just what Shin Megami Tensei is like historically. And if you're coming into Shin Megami Tensei from the Persona series, you might be in for a surprise, as the two properties are tonally quite different. This is just a really roundabout way of saying that Shin Megami Tensei, and by extension Nocturne, is not gonna be for everyone. It's much darker and less upbeat than its Persona spin-offs, and it doesn't feature the same vibrant in-game universe as your Final Fantasy XIIs and your Dragon Quest VIIIs. But that's really to Nocturne's benefit. If it was just another Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest-style JRPG, it would be significantly less interesting as a video game. So if you're willing to give it a shot, you'll find that Nocturne still sports a really strong story that stands on its own merits. Regarding the story, it's worth noting that the English translation has been rewritten from the original PS2 version. I didn't have any major complaints with the original translation, but the remaster flows a lot more naturally. And this is really important because Nocturne HD adds voice acting to the mix that was not present in the original game. English and Japanese dialogues are readily available, and I chose to play the game in Japanese, but both options are really good.
やがて来る力をなくした世界。それは無へとただ向かうだけ。ならばその世界を救うため、その身を母の宿りへと返そう。世界はまた生まれるため死んでいかなければならない。
A world that loses its power will fade into nothing. If such is the fate of this world, then I shall return it to its mother's womb. The world must first die, for it to be born again.
The music, however, is another story. Nocturne's soundtrack composition is pretty good, but the audio doesn't seem to have been remastered at all. It still sounds really compressed, just like how it was on PS2, and it stands out against the rest of the game. This is a very strange corner to cut, and I honestly wish Atlus would have rescored the music to bring it up to modern standards. As it is, I'd have to say the music audio quality is actually bad. By comparison, Nocturne's gameplay has held up much better, though the non-combat parts definitely show their age. Shin Megami Tensei 3's movement feels very slippery. Games of this generation sometimes had floatiness to them, and that carried over to Nocturne HD. It's hard to tell without actually playing it yourself, but check out how this very basic movement seems like ice skating. And Nocturne's movement is digital rather than analog, so your exploration speed is binary. You're either running or standing still. And all the same things can be said about the game's camera controls. The camera fidelity has been improved, but not in a noticeable way unless you've played the original and the remaster side by side. At the very least, you can use the right analog stick to actually control the camera instead of the weird rubber banding thing that the original game had going on. The good news is that the combat still feels really satisfying, albeit lacking the polish and quality of life improvements that later titles across all of Megami Tensei brought to the fray. Clashes are conducted in turn-based affairs, and enemies have elemental weaknesses and resistances that need to be exploited. If you land a critical hit or exploit a weakness, this adds a bonus action to your party's turns, and it's possible to stack up to 4 additional actions totaling 8 consecutive turns. Enemies can do this to you as well though, so it's important to keep your bases covered with weaknesses and resistances. The Magatama system lets you swap out your main character's build, adjusting his elemental affinities and stats for the coming trials. Different Magatama also grant different skills upon leveling up, which makes you more versatile. And you can have demons join your cause in various ways, from recruiting them during battle to fusing 2 demons into a stronger one. The fundamentals found in combat are as sound as ever, and Nocturne HD's battles are still very engaging. There are some basic quality of life improvements that have been added, like the merciful difficulty option and a suspend feature. However, the features I wished were present were things like knowing if and/or how many of an item I may be holding if a demon requests it during recruitment, seeing known weaknesses and resistances above each enemy when highlighted, an autoplay and skip option for cutscenes, maybe even a slider to adjust the random encounter rate, and a high-speed gameplay mode a la Trails of Cold Steel on PS4 and Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. None of these things are present in Nocturne HD, and all of them would have made the game immensely more playable. At the bare minimum, I wish the features that were present in later Shin Megami Tensei games were retroactively added to Nocturne via this remaster. Don't get me wrong, Nocturne's combat is still great. Classic is classic, and you don't get much more classic than a turn-based JRPG. But there were some obvious gameplay additions that this remaster is woefully lacking. As with most remasters, the visuals are the most noticeable improvement. Nocturne HD obviously looks a lot better than vanilla Nocturne, even on the Switch tablet screen. Of course, the resolution has been improved to 1080p on PS4 and Switch docked, and 720p on undocked Switch, which is great because the original game didn't even utilize the PS2's progressive scan feature. The remaster's aspect ratio is now 16:9 instead of the PS2's 4:3, the textures are better, the contrast is better, it's all the expected improvements, and it looks really good. Nocturne HD won't trick you into thinking it's a brand new title, it is still a 2003 game at its core. But as far as PS2 remasters go, Nocturne HD looks very clean. My biggest issue outside of the compressed music, however, is with performance. For a remaster of a PS2 game, you'd think Atlus would bump the frame rate up to 60 FPS. Unfortunately, Nocturne HD is locked at 30 FPS on all platforms. Worse yet, the Switch version can get pretty choppy at times, depending on how much action is happening on screen. These issues are mostly non-factors given the turn-based combat, but again, I really wish Atlus would have improved and optimized the frame rate for this remaster. Let's do some version comparisons, starting with the original PS2 game. This was recorded using PS2 component cables, so it may look a little better than you remember if you only played Nocturne with a PS2 composite signal. Here's Nintendo Switch handheld, already looks immediately better thanks to the HD resolution and 16:9 aspect ratio. Next up we have Switch docked, that pushes us from 720p to 1080p. And of course, let's cap it off with the PS4 version running on PS5, which basically looks the same as Nocturne HD running on docked Switch. So again, the remaster looks pretty good, it's no surprise there, and the art style works in tandem with the remastering to help hide the game's age. It's just a shame that it doesn't run better. A good remaster invokes the spirit of how you remember games of a bygone era. A remaster like Shin Megami Tensei 3 HD only delivers the reality of how those games have actually aged. The real crux of this review is that Nocturne HD is 99% utilitarian. The game is so focused on functionality that it doesn't leave much room for embellishments. The touched-up graphics are good, but not great, the resolution is improved, but not impressive, the performance is nothing noteworthy at best, and there are frame rate issues on Switch. The voice acting is well delivered in either language, but it's backed by horribly compressed music that varies wildly in quality from track to track due to decades-old file compression. And the gameplay is still great, but it lacks many of the modern refinements that should have been included. For everything that pushes this remaster forward, there's another thing that draws it back. As I said, Shin Megami Tensei 3 HD is still a PS2 game at its core, and you can tell. For what it's worth, I still enjoyed my time with Nocturne HD, and hopefully some of you do too. But I'd rather get a great remaster of a game I enjoyed than just a remaster of a game I enjoyed. And despite my fandom for the series, I cannot in good faith recommend this remaster as is unless you already know what to expect and you're willing to put on some rose-tinted glasses. This one is only for the already entrenched fans. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster earns a 6 out of 10 on PlayStation 4 and a 5.5 out of 10 on Nintendo Switch. Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell, and check out the videos on screen. Thanks.